Within a sect of the Appalachians, among America's darkest cults, women were forced to generate consanguineous children. This stands as the story of one of the most disturbing cases uncovered in recent American history. A case that, for nearly 4 decades, remained hidden within the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains, only to be revealed in 1975. It was in the autumn of 1975 that police officer Raymond Hulcom was navigating a trail through the dense forests of Appalachia in western Virginia. He was investigating reports about young women disappearing in the region. The weather was changing. Golden red leaves fell upon the damp ground as gray clouds blocked out the sun. The crunch of Hulcom's boots on dried branches was the only sound beyond the sharp wind blowing between the trees. After a 3-day search, Hulcom discovered a hidden clearing, invisible from the main paths. There, concealed by dense vegetation and natural rock formations, stood a complex of rustic cabins, an isolated settlement, completely disconnected from the world outside. As he approached with caution, the policeman noticed something disturbing. Children displaying evident physical characteristics of genetic problems were playing on the muddy ground. But what caught his attention most was the silence. The children did not speak. They merely emitted incomprehensible sounds among themselves. Their faces bore similar features, as if they were all siblings. Yet, something was deeply wrong there, Hulcom would later report in his official documentation. This marked the first contact the outside world would have with the Shefford community. An isolated sect founded back in 1932 by Isaiah Shefford, a former mining man who, after the Great Depression, led 12 families to the mountains. He promised them a new life, far from the poverty and economic difficulties plaguing the nation. What started as a refuge for desperate families transformed, over 4 decades, into one of the most disturbing cases of isolation and the systematic practice of consanguineous relationships ever documented in the United States. In the weeks that followed the discovery, an investigation led by the Department of Social Services uncovered 87 people living within the Shefford community. Among them, 32 were children and adolescents with varying degrees of cognitive and physical impairment. Many suffered from congenital malformations such as cleft palates, deformed jaws, and severe vision problems. The documentation discovered on-site, which included a detailed diary maintained by the leader Isaiah Shefford, revealed something even more disturbing. The community had developed an elaborate system of arranged marriages among close relatives, with the explicit goal of purifying the blood of the Shefford lineage. We now understand that the Shefford blood must remain pure, free from the impurities of the outside world. Each new generation, forged within our own lineage, brings us closer to the perfection we have been promised, Isaiah wrote in an entry from 1956, by which time the community was already in its 2nd generation of consanguineous marriages. Subsequent studies indicated that the average child born in the Shefford community shared more genetic material with one another than normal siblings would in conventional families. Geographic and social isolation, combined with religious indoctrination, had created a closed system where the practice of consanguinity was not just accepted, but actively encouraged. Dr. Elizabeth Marvers, a geneticist from the University of Virginia who studied the case, explained, "What we found in the Shefford community was a perfect storm, a combination of geographical isolation, extreme poverty, and religious indoctrination. This resulted in a dramatic increase in problematic recessive genes manifesting within the population. The consequences for the children, both physical and cognitive, were devastating. One of the most shocking discoveries was the House of Mothers, a separate cabin where women of reproductive age were kept under strict vigilance. According to testimonies gathered, these women were classified by their lineage and assigned to specific partners by Isaiah Shefford, and later, by his eldest son, Ezekiel. Rebecca Shefford, one of the rescued 24-year-old women, reported, "Since childhood, they taught us that our sacred purpose was to generate children for the glory of the family. We sincerely believed the outside world was condemned, and that only pure blood would survive the time to come." Check it out if you're already subscribed to this channel. The truth about these secret communities needs to be revealed, and we are the ones with the courage to show what society tries to hide. Subscribe now so you don't miss any of these stories that the mainstream tries to silence. The year was 1932, and the United States was facing the worst moments of the Great Depression. In a small mining village in Western Virginia, Isaiah Shefford, then 41, was known for his apocalyptic sermons. A former miner and World War I veteran, Isaiah had become a charismatic figure, mixing biblical passages with conspiracy theories about civilization's imminent collapse. "The world, as we know it, is dying," he preached. "Bankers and politicians have corrupted everything. Only the blood of our blood will survive what is to come." The devastating economic conditions of that era created a perfect environment for his ideas to gain traction. Entire families had lost everything: jobs, homes, life savings. The despair was palpable, and Isaiah offered them something precious: hope and a concrete plan. In March of that year, Isaiah brought together 12 families, approximately 67 people, and led them to a remote region in the Appalachian Mountains, about 40 kilometers from the nearest city. The area, which he claimed to have received in a divine vision, was an abandoned property of over 200 acres, complete with a natural water source and land that could be cultivated. Martha Jenkins, one of the few survivors of the original community who later left, described the early years. "At first, it was about survival and independence. We built cabins, planted gardens, raised animals. We worked from dawn until dusk. But there was a genuine feeling of community and purpose." Historical records confirm this. Initially, the Shefford community functioned much like other groups seeking self-sufficiency during the Great Depression. They made semi-annual trips to the nearest city to trade animal skins and handicrafts for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. The community's transformation into an isolationist sect happened gradually. Isaiah's diaries, recovered during the investigation, show a dramatic shift in his thinking around 1938, when he began developing what he called the doctrine of blood purity. "I had a revelation last night," he wrote in September 1938. "Our community was chosen to preserve the true human lineage. The outside world is contaminated, its genes corrupted by generations of impure mixtures. We must look inward, not outward, to find our partners." This shift coincided with two significant events: the death of Isaiah's wife, Sarah, during childbirth, and the beginning of World War II in Europe, which he interpreted as the start of the apocalypse he had predicted. From 1940 onward, trips to the city became less frequent, ceasing completely by 1945. Isaiah implemented a lineage council, a system where he, as the patriarch, determined who could marry whom within the community. The first arranged marriages involved second cousins, a practice that, while increasing the risks of genetic problems, still maintained enough diversity to avoid severe immediate issues. However, over generations of continuous isolation, the options became increasingly limited. The wedding system was supposedly based on spiritual compatibility, but in practice, it meant Isaiah completely controlled reproduction within the community, explained Dr. James Thornton, an anthropologist who studied the case extensively. Over time, virtually everyone in the community became related on multiple kinship levels. In 1952, Isaiah formalized what would become the sect's most disturbing aspect: the House of Mothers. All women of reproductive age were moved to a central cabin, living under the direct supervision of Martha Sheff, Isaiah's second wife. A recovered document entitled Laws of Purification explicitly outlined the treatment of women. "Woman is the sacred vessel through which our lineage purifies itself. She does not belong to herself, but to the continuity of Shefford blood." Women were subjected to regular examinations to determine their fertile cycles and were designated to specific partners during these periods. Those who could not conceive after 3 years were relegated to service functions like food preparation and caring for younger children. "What makes the Shefford case particularly disturbing," notes Sarah Miller, a historian specializing in isolated Appalachian communities, "is how it transformed common regional cultural practices, self-sufficiency, distrust of government, strong family identity into an oppressive system justified by a twisted ideology." With Isaiah's death in 1963 at age 72, leadership passed to his eldest son, Ezekiel, then 38. Under his command, consanguineous practices grew even more extreme, now including unions between uncles and nieces, and even between half-siblings. An entry from Ezekiel's diary, dated 1968, reveals the intensifying ideology: "My father began our purification, but it falls to me to complete it. Each generation must come closer to perfection, until our blood becomes one and indivisible. The community's isolation was reinforced by severe punishments for any member who expressed a desire for contact with the outside world. Survivor testimonies describe a purification system involving periods of lone confinement and food deprivation. When the community was finally discovered in 1975, it was in its third generation of systematic consanguineous marriages, and the devastating genetic consequences were becoming increasingly evident. Hannah Shefford was just 18 when police and social services arrived. Unlike many children born there, Hannah had no visible physical deformities. But psychological evaluations years later would reveal the profound impact of isolation and indoctrination. "I was considered special because I was born without the marks," Hannah explained in a 1982 statement. Ezekiel said, "I was proof we were on the right track, that the purification was working. I believed him completely." Hannah had been designated as the future wife of Jacob, her father's half-brother and her first-degree cousin on her mother's side. The marriage was scheduled for her 19th birthday, just 3 months after the authorities intervened. The medical evaluations of the 32 children and adolescents revealed a disturbing pattern of conditions associated with consanguinity. Among the most common problems were cognitive deficits, ranging from severe in 27 of the 32 children, facial malformations, including underdeveloped jaws, in 19 children, fused fingers, syndactyly, in 8 children, congenital heart defects in 11 children, severe vision problems, including partial blindness, in 14 children. What we saw was an abnormal concentration of rare genetic conditions, described Dr. Catherine Reynolds, the pediatrician who coordinated the initial evaluations. In such a small population, the likelihood of observing so many manifestations of problematic recessive genes would be practically zero without the presence of systematic consanguinity. One of the most alarming findings was the prevalence of Tay-Sachs disease among the younger children, a condition typically associated with Ashkenazi Jewish populations and rarely seen in American rural communities. 5 children under 3 showed signs of the disease, which is invariably fatal and results from both parents carrying the recessive gene. The presence of Tay-Sachs in this population indicates one of the original founders was likely a carrier, explained Dr. Reynolds. In a normal population, the chance of 2 carriers meeting and having children is extremely low. But with repeated consanguineous marriages, the gene concentrated in the population until it emerged with devastating force. The psychological impact on the community's women was equally profound. Of the 23 rescued women of reproductive age, 18 had given birth at least once. Interviews with psychologists revealed patterns of complex trauma, including severe dissociation during traumatic events and fragmented identity, difficulty making autonomous decisions, deeply rooted beliefs about purity and contamination, and a paralyzing fear of the outside world, coupled with devastating guilt for their participation in the system, even as victims. Rebecca, one of the rescued women, shared, "The hardest thing was realizing that we loved our children desperately, but we brought them into the world under conditions that condemned them to suffering. How does a mother overcome that?" If you are feeling revulsion and compassion at the same time, leave the phrase "no child deserves this" in the comments. Your voice is important for these stories to be known, so situations like these never happen again. For the children born in the community, the transition to the outside world was especially traumatic. Beyond their medical challenges, they had to adapt to a world completely different from the one they knew. These children not only faced physical and cognitive disabilities, but also a deep cultural maladjustment, explained Dr. Michael Landry, a child psychologist who worked with the Shefford children for over a decade. They grew up believing the outside world was malignant and their community was the only safe place. The intervention, while necessary to save them, was experienced as an additional trauma. Recordings from the first therapy sessions with the older children revealed the depth of their indoctrination. Many expressed fear of contamination from contact with strangers and demonstrated ritualized behaviors associated with purification. Samuel, a rescued 16-year-old, described in a recorded session, "We need to do the purification rituals every morning, or the bad blood will take over. If we don't, the marks will appear on our faces and everyone will know we are contaminated." In 1977, 2 years after the discovery, the University of Virginia established the Lineage Project, a multidisciplinary study dedicated to analyzing the genetic, psychological, and sociological effects of 4 decades of isolation and systematic consanguinity. The Shefford case offered a unique, though profoundly tragic, opportunity to study the effects of consanguinity in an isolated human population over multiple generations, explained Dr. Robert Harrington, the geneticist leading the scientific part of the project. The data collected has been invaluable for understanding how deleterious recessive genes manifest in closed populations. Analysis of the community's genetic and genealogical records revealed an average coefficient of consanguinity of 0.16 in the last generation, an extremely high value, comparable only to some historically isolated communities worldwide. For context, the coefficient for first-degree cousins is approximately 0.0625. What we saw was a progressive and deliberate accumulation of consanguinity, explained Dr. Harrington. It started with marriages between second cousins in the first generation, evolved to first cousins in the second, and finally included unions between half-siblings and uncles and nieces in the third. This deliberate escalation resulted in a dramatic reduction in genetic diversity and a corresponding increase in rare recessive diseases. One revealing aspect was the analysis of specific genetic markers. Researchers identified an abnormally high prevalence of homozygosity, where children had inherited 2 identical alleles of a gene from a common ancestor. In a normal population, the chance of inheriting 2 identical alleles of a rare recessive gene is extremely low, noted Dr. Margaret Wilson, a medical genetics expert involved in the study. But in the Shefford community, we saw multiple cases where this occurred, resulting in conditions with odds of 1 in tens of thousands. A key finding was identifying a specific genetic mutation on chromosome 11, associated with a rare congenital heart disease. This mutation, rare in the general population, was present in 37% of the children tested. We are observing the founder effect combined with a bottleneck effect, Dr. Wilson explained. A rare mutation from one founder became common due to reproductive isolation and repeated consanguineous marriages. Beyond physical manifestations, the study extensively documented the cognitive and neurological effects. IQ tests revealed an average score 23 points below the expected norm for their age group. The observed cognitive impact cannot be attributed solely to social isolation or lack of education, concluded Dr. Harrington. The patterns are consistent with the known effects of inbreeding depression, the reduction in biological fitness from reproduction between genetically related individuals. A particularly disturbing aspect was how the community had developed a belief system to rationalize and even celebrate the physical manifestations of consanguinity. Documents showed children born with obvious malformations were described as having sacred marks, visible signs of their lineage. Those with severe cognitive problems were seen as blessed with eternal innocence. This is a classic example of how ideologies evolve to justify harmful practices, noted Dr. Susan Reynolds, a cultural anthropologist who analyzed the belief system. The community developed a complex mythology that transformed evidence of genetic damage into signs of high spiritual status. The Shefford case raised difficult ethical and legal questions. While the practices were clearly harmful, many adults were sincerely following their religious beliefs with no intent to harm. The Lineage Project also documented the survivors' adaptation process, revealing complex patterns of trauma, resilience, and recovery that would inform future protocols for intervening in isolated communities. 50 years after its discovery, the legacy of the Shefford community continues to reverberate in genetics, psychology, law, and ethics. The case remains one of the most extensively documented examples of systematized consanguinity in modern history. For the survivors, the path to recovery was long and complex. Of the 87 people rescued in 1975, 23 have since passed away, many from health complications related to their genetic conditions. The younger children, now adults in their 50s, continue to face significant challenges. Emily Shefford, who was only 3 when the community was discovered, shared her journey in a 2015 documentary, I Grew Up Between Two Worlds. The one we left behind in the mountains, and an outside world that never fully understood who we were. Most people see me as just a victim. But our story is more complex than that. Despite being born with severe physical deformities, including fused fingers that limited her mobility, Emily earned a university degree and became an advocate for the rights of people with disabilities of genetic origin. "What happened was tragically wrong," she said. "But reducing people born there to mere victims or medical curiosities is another form of dehumanization. We are complete individuals, not just manifestations of troubled genes." The case led to significant policy changes. The Shefford Protocol, developed in 1982, established guidelines for balancing religious autonomy with the protection of children's fundamental rights in similar situations. Before Shefford, there was significant reluctance to intervene in isolated religious communities, explained Helen Roberts, a child protection expert who helped develop the protocol. This case set a precedent reaffirming that practices causing objective harm to children cannot be protected under religious freedom. In medical genetics, samples from the community continue to provide valuable insights. The Shefford Genetic Bank at the University of Virginia has helped researchers identify genes for rare conditions and develop detection tests. The tragedy of the Shefford community continues to contribute to advances that can prevent similar suffering, noted Dr. Jonathan Chun, a geneticist at Johns Hopkins University. "It's a powerful example of learning from past errors." For local Appalachian communities, the case remains sensitive. Many descendants of the original families who did not follow Isaiah still live in the region and face stigmatization. "There's a tendency to treat this as a freak occurrence, disconnected from regional history," said John Matthews, a local historian. "But the truth is, it emerged from real conditions: the extreme poverty of the Depression, the geographical isolation, traditions of self-reliance and distrust of outsiders. Ignoring this context prevents us from recognizing how similar communities could form again." In 2005, a small memorial was placed on the land, now a nature reserve. A simple bronze plaque bears the names of the 23 children and adults who died from complications related to consanguinity, with the inscription, "In memory of those whose lives were shortened by false beliefs. May their story teach us the value of diversity and human connection." The case continues to inform contemporary debates on the limits of religious freedom, children's rights, and state responsibility. The Shefford case forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable issues about autonomy, consent, and protection, noted Richard Dawson, a professor of medical ethics at Georgetown University. Where do we draw the line when religious practices cause demonstrable harm? For medical professionals, the case highlights the importance of genetic counseling. "We use it as a case study," explained Dr. Emily Carter, a genetic counseling expert at the Mayo Clinic, "not just to illustrate the biological risks, but to teach how to approach this topic in a culturally sensitive, non-stigmatizing way." Check it out if you're already subscribed to this channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a comment saying "I watched here" so I can meet you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. Like this video and share it with someone you believe should know this impressive story. No child deserves to be born condemned, and only through education and awareness can we prevent tragedies like this from recurring.